Welcome to a Leader's Journey podcast. I'm your host, Joel Gunn, and so excited today to have Lisa Fullerton with me. Lisa, welcome to the show.
It's good to be here, Joel.
You and I've been trying to get synced up for a while, so really excited to have you today. For those that don't know, Lisa and I have been friends now for, feels like 5 years.
Or plus. Yeah.
Or plus, okay. And she and her husband both been in the business world for a lot of years, but you started out the business first, and then he joined you later. Tell us a little bit of your journey there, and then we'll go some different places after that.
Okay. I came to San Antonio in 2000 to open our first Auntie Anne's Pretzels, and I landed on Pretzels, not because I'd ever worked retail, but because I knew the founder, Ann Byler. So back in the mid-'80s, when I was my first homeowner, she and her husband were my next-door neighbors. So I have a very personal connection to Ann Byler, and I love her story about the Christian symbolism of pretzels. So I don't know if most people know this, but the pretzel goes back to 611 A.D., where Italian monks would take leftover scraps of Easter bread, and they would roll it into a line, and they would fold it in the shape of hands in prayer. So pretiola in Latin means little rewards. So they would give these little rewards to kids for reciting their prayers. And most people don't know that the three holes in a pretzel symbolize the Trinity. So I've always had an emotional connection to Ann Byler, who was the founder of Auntie Anne's Pretzels, and I've always had an affinity for that story. As a Christian, I love that. I love that part of our history. That's so we're much more than just a great tasting pretzel.
That's very cool. And so you came to San Antonio, opened your first franchise. It eventually grew to a lot more. I'll let you tell the story.
So I decided to open my first store and work every position in the store. So I know what it was I was asking others to do. And I feel like it's greatest to lead by example, which meant I did dishes, which meant I served customers. And my first 3 years, I worked 70 hours. So I worked in the office doing all the administrative, the payables, the payroll, the schedules, food orders, all of the paperwork for staffing. And then at night, I would go in and work a 3 to close, and I would get home typically 11 or 12 at night and do it again. And so that was a 7-day work week for the first 3 years.
Wow.
So, but realizing I couldn't keep up that pace is when I realized there was a difference between running and being engaged in my business and letting it run me. So second store, 2 years later, third store, 5 years from the beginning. That's when people say, when you have 3 stores, you can start to hire a district manager and manage that function for you. So that's when I was able to do more of the administrative, and that's my sweet spot. My background's accounting and finance, and that's the stuff I love, is the financial acumen part of the business. But having worked in the stores, I had a lot of staff that stayed with me who I worked side by side with, because I was able to model what it was I was hoping that I could emulate for them.
And eventually ended up owning 9 locations?
We had 9 stores. Right. So in 2010, our stores were sold to a private equity, the franchise was sold to a private equity firm. And that private equity firm owns Cinnabon, Schlotzsky's, it owns Carvel, it now owns Jamba Juice, Moe's Southwest Grill, Carvel Ice Cream, and also Seattle's Best International. So that's when they started doing co-brands. So that's why you see a lot of Auntie Anne's with the Cinnabon. Sometimes you'll see Schlotzsky's with the Cinnabon Express menu. You'll see what they now have as Trombo's, tri brands, which Auntie Anne's, Cinnabon, and Jamba. It's because we're sister brands. So I got into Auntie Anne's because I was emotionally connected to the founder. We added on Cinnabon because it was a sister brand. So that's why when I talk about my business, I have a glow in my face when I talk about Auntie Anne's, because it's very personal. Her being my next door neighbor, I remember coming home one day and walking outside and seeing her standing with her hands out in front of bushes. And I rounded the corner and I said, "What are you doing?" And she said, "I'm praying for these bushes. We don't have the money to replace them." And she was praying, "Lord, I pray life to thee." And those trees, those bushes, those crepe myrtles were huge by the end of the season. But probably my favorite story about Auntie Anne's, the founder, is that she used to cut and perm my hair and serve me the lemonade that we now serve in our stores. So, God's providence of saying, this is just the beginning of your life together. She's been a 40-year friend, and I can call her for business reasons. I can call her for wayward children reasons, because we have that in common. And, even fellowship just Christian business ethics, just running stuff past her. So, yeah, that's an emotional brand for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What? So you exited most of those locations. That was a whole journey that I got to walk a little bit with you in that season. As you started getting more stores, you also started being more active in the community. The mayors ask you to be, involved in things there. I'll let you explain that. The governors ask you to be involved in some things. How did that transition start happening for you, where you went from being a business owner to now you've only got one of the locations that you still are involved with, but you're even more active?
You mean, how did Pretzels become political?
Yeah,
that's a great question, Joel.
That actually might be a good title for the podcast.
Pretzels become political. Well, in 2012, we were asked to join a master concessionaire with an opportunity for a disadvantaged business enterprise to join their coalition of stores as a part of a request for proposal within the airport. And so, because the city owns that airport, because the city is our landlord, I almost became an activist for small business, because I realized at that time there's people who can advocate for our business who don't really understand how our businesses are run. Mm-hmm. And so I started joining like the coalitions of chambers that would go from, they had an annual event, SA to DC. So we started going to the nation's capital to talk about small business issues. They asked me to be a chair of the small business issues. And then paid sick leave came around in 2019, and it was the city or labor unions that were mandating that we offer paid sick leave to our staff. And I'm not opposed to that. We had paid leave for our staff, but to mandate the number of hours and what we pay as an hourly rate from people who don't understand the cost of running a business, if I were to have enforced and asked to comply with that, I would have to get rid of my 401k plan, my profit sharing. We did life insurance. We did health insurance. We had benefits that most people in the food industry don't have. So when the city or the county or the state or the federal government starts to mandate how you run your business, they are homogenizing me with my neighbor, and I can't become distinctly different. So if I'm paying $15 an hour, abiding by the exact same business principles as my neighbor, I don't have any distinctive difference to sway people to join us, to be, one of our employees. And it was then that I started to share my story, not realizing people are afraid of sharing their story for fear they're going to offend somebody. And I don't believe that the truth offends people. I think there's a winsome way in which to engage in the truth. But I started to share my story. So when the mayor put together a commission to have business owners as well as labor union folks at the table, I said to the mayor in a business coalition meeting, I want to sit at the table. And I made that statement, and there were gasps around the room, and they said, I can't believe you would say that in front of everybody. And I said, what's wrong with accountability? I've asked him in front of a group of my peers that I want to sit at the table, and he did. He asked me to join that. So I began to do that more often. I went to the state legislature 3 different times over 5 years, because we're a biennial session. They only meet every 2 years, to advocate for regulatory consistency. And finally, after 5 years and 3 legislative sessions, it was passed. It was deemed that you can't alter labor rates, minimum wage. That was against the minimum wage law. So it was deemed by the Texas Supreme Court to not be lawful. They couldn't impose that. But they said, we can't get people to stand up and tell their story. And I felt like I need to tell the story, because there's people who can legislate to me that do not understand it. I needed to backfill. I needed to educate them. So that's really how I started getting involved, from the mayor's commission to Governor Abbott has asked me to join his small business advisory task force, because we actually help script what small business issues we want them to focus on in the upcoming legislative session. We are currently working on that draft for next January session.
So it sounds like you almost got involved in politics out of necessity. I don't want to say survival, but if you hadn't have acted, you could have ended up in a survival situation.
Absolutely. I'm currently in another city discussion, and that is there was a new request for proposal put out for the airport spaces. So a lot of people don't know this, but the airport spaces, there's a request for proposal that because it's considered a high-profile contract, they send it out to master concessionaires who can construct what those spaces look like, what brands and what offerings to put. But according to the Civil Rights Act of 1964, small business, either minority-owned or female-run, are awarded a particular percentage of that opportunity. And so I'm kind of a necessary evil, if you will. It's not evil, it's not the right word, but I'm necessary for them to be in compliance. And so the RFP came out for the spaces that don't have guaranteed lease term, and it had some really punitive cost associated to that really didn't show that the city understands what small business means, what we can afford. It would cost me over 2 times more if I were to build out my space today versus the space that we built out 12 years ago. So I've been engaged with the city council people, having meetings with the mayor's office, just to make sure that they understand I'm a 12 years pretty successful franchisee, probably one of the highest sales per square foot in that airport, thanks to the city of San Antonio loving the smell of Cinnabon and the pretzels. But I felt that they needed to know why I didn't bid because it was cost prohibitive, but I wanted to ask them, would you take a look at this, pull it off the table and make some modifications? Because if you're asking for small business to participate, this will not result in a successful outcome for any small business. And I just thought they would want to know why a successful tenant there for 13 years didn't bid on something that they feel was a good opportunity. So again, just more of the education process.
I think a lot of Americans are removed from the political process because the old saying goes, in business, you don't talk about church or politics, right?
Or at family reunions.
Or at family reunions. But I think for whatever reason, the current people in the marketplace from all generations, I'm not picking on the older generation or the younger generation or anybody in between, for whatever reason, people that are in the marketplace today seem to be less aware or less interested or less active in understanding local or regional politics. You said you've run into some people, I think the word you used was they were fearful, to speak up. But what's been your reaction as you're interacting with the mayor's office or the governor's office? Are they happy to have you talking to them, or are they like rolling their eyes and shooing you out the door? And
I have to say they've been extremely welcoming, and some of what I proposed and outlined to them to say, look at the price per square foot you're asking us to spend, $650 a square foot for food retail. And then we have to build out the food court, it's a common area for another $200 a square foot. I don't even know that there's a house in San Antonio where you could spend that kind of money. And so spending money is not going to make money. And so to force me to come up with a look that maybe even my brand can't find a look that sophisticated. We're still a small, very successful airport, but I don't think you build expensive retail outlets and that's going to increase traffic. So they have been very receptive when I pointed that out. And again, if people have not run a business and had not had to build out and develop a leasehold improvement, develop a floor plan, develop a business strategy, those things probably don't resonate to them the way they do. So I've said to them, I'd be more than happy to sit on a task force and help you through some of these and educate you. I get people all the time that say, educate me on what it is about the airport. Why is it so complicated? Why is it so difficult to get in? And so I welcome those conversations. And I think what maybe I'm a little different than others is, as Christians, we are asked to speak the truth. And there's a lot of people afraid to tell the truth today because they're afraid of offending somebody. But I think there's a winsome way, a thoughtful way you can have that conversation. I've never been a beat people over the head with my Christianity. I prefer to lead by example. And, we're asked to step into the marketplace. And I feel the more truthful I am and the people I can engage with. I've asked city council people who are having some life issues, can I pray for you? I had someone who's running for council who's about to announce that's running in my district. And I said, can I pray for you? What can I pray for you? And she was taken back and she gave me a couple things to pray for. And I said, can I pray for you right now? I've never had anybody say no. And then after I prayed for her, she said, no one's done that for me before. Oh. And just to be able to pray for people. During COVID, I sent text to several people in city council, the mayor included, to say, I can't imagine how difficult this time is for you, trying to decide how the city moves forward. I'm praying for, I prayed for you this morning. You were on my heart. Every single one of them said, you have no idea what that meant to me. Wow. So I think just by being able to share our faith in a thoughtful, approachable way lets them know you can come to me when you've got a difficult, because I am that person who's not going to beat you over the head with my faith. I just prefer for people to ask me, like it's 1 Peter 3:15, be prepared to answer for the reason for the joy that is within you. And the joy that is within me is the Lord, because the Lord has stepped ahead of me in several ways that I myself thought I could manage. As a business owner, we tend to think I can manage all my own affairs. I've got this. That's what being a leader is. And you had mentioned earlier, yes, we had sold several of our stores. And back in 2021, we sold all of our mall-based stores. I still own the airport. I'm still the franchisee. But the group who bought our mall stores, because they can't qualify for the certification I have, we have a management agreement where they operate the airport for us. They've got 220 stores. They're experts at operations. But I'm legal, legislative, contractual. I've got relationships with people within the city. So we're doing extremely well because they're in their sweet spot and I'm in my sweet spot. And it's just been a fabulous collaboration. But I had some struggles in the sale of those mall stores, and that's the part you walked with me through. You had to talk me down from the ledge several times. But my husband and I had done a strategic plan of it'd be great to say we could be in this industry for 20 years, because the average lifespan of food and beverage is 7 to 10. It's 8.5 for Auntie Anne specifically. So the fact that we've been in this for 24 years, which is 3 times the norm, says that I think a lot of that's our financial acumen. We're frugal in our spending. We love our staff. Our staff was the most significant, important thing, and we ran our business like a family. Every single staff member had my cell phone number. I was available to anybody who needed me, but they had to go through the chain of command. But I would engage with any staff, and I think that made us fairly unique because we had upwards of 100 employees. But we had decided 2020 was when we wanted to get out. So we had actually been negotiating on a sale of all of our stores, all the stores, in 2019, and spent 11 months in negotiations. And the airport being one of those holdup, they didn't want to allow me to continue to be the franchisee, and my master concessionaire would not approve them in my place. So after 11 months of negotiations, it broke down, and all I had to show for it was a 6-figure legal bill. So to say I was defeated, is an understatement. Mm-hmm. So this is the time when C12 and you came into my life, because I'd been told, you really should join C12. It would be good for you as a Christian, as a leader. But I kept saying, I'm going to sell my business. I'm getting out. And that was the mindset I had at that time that I found myself having to reinvigorate. So at the end of 2019, I told myself, watch out, 2020, here I come. I'm all in. I am back. And then less than 90 days later, we're closing all of our stores, with the exception of the airport. And what we thought was the 10 days stay-at-home orders to slow the spread turned into 10 weeks. It was a very, very desperate time. And so to say I was angry with the Lord is another understatement. So I was wrestling with God a lot during that time. And Mike Sherrill of C12, the CEO of C12, said, you're a little negative. You might want to consider the Colson Fellows program, which is a 10-month deep dive into Christian worldview. Like, how can I wear my Christian worldview every day, every situation, in my business, in my family, in areas where it's not popular? And there was such a softening of my heart at that time due to that process that, I know the Lord can handle it when I was angry at him. But I wrote down one morning, face down, just in reverence to the Lord, to say, wow, you didn't beat me over the head with my ignorance, my pride, my talking about my business, my staff, my future, my resources. You just let the Holy Spirit work through me to let me know those are all yours. You've just entrusted those to me. And I was so prideful and ignorant that this whole time I thought it was me. So that morning I said, Lord, you are the CEO. I'm taking the co-pilot seat. And if you need to bankrupt this, if you need to destroy this, I accept it. And to be honest, it was a little bit cowardice because I was so worn out. That would have been okay in that moment. But the Lord is so gracious that literally 2 months later, I would be introduced to the group who would later buy my stores. And it could not be a better circumstance than it is today. Because had we closed on that contract in 2019, as is common for deals of multiple locations this size, is there's a guaranteed payment up front and 2-year performance payments so that they make sure I'm not buying mall stores and then finding out an anchor's leaving and my sales tank, and I paid you all of the future possibility up front. Well, had we closed in 2019, there would have been no performance payment in 2020, probably minimal, if at all, in 2020. And one of the reasons that conversations broke down in 2019 was they kept taking the guaranteed and saying, well, let's just put it on the end as part of the performance payment calculation. And so the Lord spared me from myself during that time, because when we closed in August of 2021, so 3 years ago, almost to the day, we had that language in there. So not only did we, have a better financial contract between this group, but the group who I was originally going to sell to eventually sold to the same group. So those stores would have been turned over twice. And I'm so thankful that the staff was spared from that, because there would be this feeling of, gosh, is this thing not sustainable with its new ownership? And the performance payments have been there. I mean, so God graciously, revealed flaws to me in a sweet, thoughtful way, like a tender daddy does. And he's got me sitting in a situation immeasurably more than I could ever ask for or imagine, just by simply being obedient when I felt that call, or that when I felt that moment of conversion, if you will. The scales were removed from my eyes, like Paul, to say, oh my gosh, I have been shortchanging you. I've been putting myself at the center as if I was the God of this business. And I never gave you the proper credit. So now, because things have been so magnanimously better, again, more than I could have ever asked, I can't help but talk about the Lord and what he's done for our business. So my husband has a saying, those that love the Lord love to talk about the Lord. So it's hard for me to reel that in, realizing not everybody is in the same place I was. So to be tender in those conversations, and again, let them ask for the reason for the joy that's within you. Because to me, that speaks volumes more than words itself.
I want to go back for a second and just reflect on, you said more or less that you weren't happy with God and the way things were going down. Because 2019, you'd spent 11 months, 6 figures, negotiating this deal, and then it all falls apart. And 90 days later, you're mandated. It's against the law for your employees to show up to work. Right, the malls are closed. The airport
was open, but it was apocalyptic.
Yeah, it was like
we were spending more in payroll than we were doing in sales.
Yeah, and but the reason I want to emphasize that is how many of us have done that, where we're in a point in life where it's not good. And I don't want to say how bad is, but we're at that point where, like, God, you could fix this just like that. If you just...
Haven't you heard me, Lord? I've been protesting you. I've been telling you exactly how this should play out.
That's right. My plans are great. This is a great, you just let the sale go through. I'd be done with it. But he actually saved you, which you didn't know for really 2 years later, almost.
Yeah.
A couple of months shy of 2 years. And you did a beautiful job describing it, but I just wanted to pause there for a second because I know I've done that, and I'm sure everybody that's tuning into this has done the same, if they're, Christ follower, and even people that aren't will blame God for life going wrong and say, you obviously don't love me or you don't care because there's a storm. And I'm uncomfortable in this storm, and I could die in this storm, right? And we see the disciples do that with Jesus in the boat. And they wake him up, these professional fishermen, and say, hey, don't you care that we're about to die? Like, this isn't, I'm overreacting. I do this for a living. My whole life, my dad was on the sea. I've been on the sea. Like, this is it. This is the end. We're done. So you might as well wake up and say goodbye. And I wrestled with that verse years ago, and Jesus looks at him and says, "How is it that you have no faith?" And so I was reflecting on it, and all of a sudden I had an understanding, and I'm not saying it's the only interpretation of this story, but I had an understanding of they went to him and said, "Jesus, do you not care that we're about to die?" The reason he said, why is it you have no faith, is because they said you don't care. But yet just verses earlier, he's doing all these miraculous things in their midst.
Right, that we fail to see.
Showing that he cares. Like, that's his whole purpose for coming to the earth, was to express, hey, I care. I see you. I hear you. Heals all the sick among them, cast out demons, all these cool things, gives them food, multiplies food, does all these things to show, hey, there is a God in heaven that cares, that hears you, that sees you. And yet they're accusing him of not caring. And how often do we do that?
Well, I'll tell you what was revealed to me, and what the Spirit is just really pouring into me right now is, I think God he wants what's best for us, but I believe he was telling me my business had become my idol. Mm-hmm. My brand, my recognition, everybody knew me as Pretzel Lady. And he revealed to me, I've been treating it as an idol. It's become my identity. Well, my identity is not my business. My identity is him. Mm-hmm. Imago Dei, I'm made in his image. But I had to have my own Abraham moment where I took my Isaac and laid it on the altar and said, I trust you. Mm-hmm. And I meant it. And that's the part that was life-changing. I meant it. Mm-hmm. It was one of the most grievous moments. I wasn't sweating blood, but I was sweating, crying. And I got up from that moment and I knew my circumstances didn't change, but I knew I did. Mm-hmm. And it was not instantaneous, but it was so beautiful, and it was so revolutionary to me that I just began to behave different. A lot of what we had done in the business prior to that was a lot of promotion of me as the leader. Mm. It was me kind of being out front to let people know, look at the things I'm doing for small business. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people would say that was very egotistical and arrogant. In hindsight, it probably was. But I think that was a part of the idol that he had to break, was to say, you can be successful and you can be well known and people can make that connection. But that connection is not the best part of you, right? Your softened heart, your leadership abilities, only because I allow him to work in me. That is what was revealed to me in that moment, is this isn't even the best part of you. This is, oh God. The best part is that I know he's the reason for all good things. All good things. So I'm living a life right now I wouldn't have even had the audacity to pray for, just by letting him lead. And so a real leader, I think what I did wrong was thinking, as a leader of many, I've probably employed 3,500 people in this market over the years. the best way to lead is to know who you're following. I'm not following the government. I'm not following the counsel. I know where my wise counsel comes from, right? It is the Lord. It is a participation of a network of believers. That's why C12 is so important, is you've got a network of other leaders who know what you're going through, who can give you biblical advice. It's my accountability. I didn't have that before. So the fact that C12 came into the mix in the midst of my joining C12 and then have that enforcement, that's just one other sweet thing that the Lord did to say, I could have done this for you all along, but you were resistant. You were out front. You were leading in a way you thought leaders should lead. So it's only when I became more submissive that I think people started to say, what's different? Something's different, but I don't know what it is.
That's
so
good.
as hard as that was literally, that was one of the epiphanies and one of the high moments for me.
I don't know if I can do it justice what you said a moment ago, but it was beautiful. The circumstances didn't change, but I did in that moment.
Yeah.
That was huge. Any final thoughts, Lisa, for this episode?
No, just thankful for opportunities like this to share with people that, have seen me in business for a long time, who might be my neighbor, who might be a colleague, to say, if you're ever struggling and you need a sister in Christ, or if you're not a believer, but you're curious, I would love to speak to you. I'd love to share with you the things I would do again, the things I've learned that I would not do again, to see if I could spare those people the stress and strain and the struggle.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your heart on that. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you. Appreciate it very much.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of A Leader's Journey podcast. If you enjoyed it, give us a thumbs up and remember to subscribe to our channel.